you thought you were skipping all the who begat, who begat, who begat who. I mean, don't you want me to read it? Don't you want to hear all 77 generations that Luke includes? All those names. It's amazing. But I do want to point out, based on our kind of theological emphases, those kind of directions, those themes that Luke has, that there are some things to note about the theology of his list. It's interesting. The first thing is Matthew does slightly something different. Matthew goes Abraham to Jesus and telling the genealogy to legitimize Jesus. Luke goes the opposite way. He assumes already Jesus is legitimized and goes from Jesus to Adam to show that Jesus is for the salvation of all humanity. You see the difference? So one is going from Abraham to Jesus to show the legitimacy of Jesus in a Jewish context. The other is going from Jesus back to Adam to show Jesus' salvation is for all peoples. You'll also note, if you go through them and you hand count them like I did, and then you fact check yourself 3 times in different references to make sure you don't get it wrong with all the engineers that might be in the room, I want you to know that Matthew includes 42 generations arranged in 3 sets of 14. You go Abraham to David, David to the Babylonian exile, and the exile to Jesus. He deliberately structures the list for symbolic purposes, and he omits several names, including many of the kings of Judah, because they don't really count apparently. But anyway, it's there. Luke, on the other hand, has 77 generations, and we would expect a longer list because he's going further back, but 77 doesn't all line up also with the list. The 14 between Abraham and David line up precisely, but the other lists are a little skewed. It includes 77 generations with more names listed between David and Jesus. It appears to follow a different line of descent as well, and that's also an important note. There's also a neat little thing where Matthew states Joseph's father is Jacob. Luke states Joseph's father is Heli. Heli is Mary's father. And so there's an implication that there is kind of an adoptive tradition there that is going on with Joseph's father. This would be consistent with Luke being more to a Gentile audience where that kind of adoptive practice would be normal for settling the lineage and who's there. Additionally, Matthew traces Jesus' lineage through Solomon, the son of David, and Bathsheba. Y'all know that story, right? It even goes so far as to say the wife of Uriah the Hittite, in case you forgot, in the lineage of Matthew to point out the scandal. There's also some real problems. In Matthew, there's a Moabite in Jesus' lineage. How can he be king if he's a descendant of people who were unable to be part of the house of the Lord? They're banned. They're never allowed in. Either children of, dun dun dun, do I need to say it amongst adults? Right? Or Moabites. They're banned. So Matthew's pointing out the scandal and how God overcomes that. In Luke's account, Luke is trying to persuade his dear friend Theophilus, the friend of God, that Jesus isn't quite as scandalous as might seem, and that even the Gentiles and proper people are allowed in the kingdom. So although Luke is going to have many places where he goes out of his way to show the inclusion of God, it's always going to be within cultural sensibilities that don't necessarily challenge or throw off some of the status quo. Now, it gets really tricky for him on some of the stuff Jesus does because it's just radical. And so even he'll have to kind of catch that and kind of deal with that. But in how he approaches his inclusion, it's a little softer. We see that definitely in this list. Because the other thing. Now, friends, I'm reporting to you. I'm not saying this is a good idea. I am just telling you this is what he did. Luke also skips all the women. That's just wrong where I come from. My mom might watch this, so I just want to be really clear that that is absolutely what not to do. This leaves out Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary. All of them get left out. Friends, they shouldn't be left out. There's no reason for it, other than you're trying to say to the Romans who are reading it, we're your kind of people, so you can be a part of the family too. It's only what I'm trying to say is his seemingly non-inclusion to the questions we're asking today was out of his radical desire to include excluded people in the Gentiles. Does that make sense? Can you follow me on that? You don't have to agree with me. There are other people who write much more harshly about it, but I'm trying to pull a Luke here, since that's where we're in. I'll be rebellious later, okay? Y'all follow me so far? How do y'all like the list? Will you ever look at the lineages the same way? Wait till you hear me give a discourse on Matthew and how it overthrows the law of the Old Testament through the lineage. It's fascinating. I've got a whole lecture on that. I'm ready to give it, but not today. Let's keep going. There's also another story that's the next one. This is the one I'll deal with on Sunday. So it's why it kind of falls at the end of this, but also too want to just kind of make sure we get it. We're coming right up already. Can you believe I have 2 minutes left? But I will probably take about 5. So I'm going to just walk you through some things about the temptation. If anybody does have to go to get back to work, you're not going to upset me, and all this will be online. But I want you to know that the temptations are probably one of the places, the tempting of Jesus after his time in the wilderness, where you see some of the most striking differences about the theology of the different gospel writers. Now, what a lot of people want to do is they want to make a historical account by getting these 3 witnesses together and settling on one way to see it. But how do you know someone's lying when you get kind of witnesses together? They all tell you the exact same story. The way you know that they're telling the truth is when their stories don't all kind of line up, right? You don't always know all the precise details, but you know more about what happened when you don't have people with a fixed story or set of phrases, okay? So for me, when I read these stories, it's no problem to me that they're kind of have a different sequence and they have some differences in them. If it is for you, I give you permission to not listen to the next 2 minutes, okay? But I want to encourage you that if you at all can hold that tension, look at it closely, because it's really important. Because what I want to do at the end of this is, as we go through these different gospels together in the next several years, is I want us to have 3 new friends who all love Jesus and are telling us their experience, not one party story that we all have to adhere to. Do you see the difference? Okay, so it's why the Bible has never been synchronized into just one telling. Some people write something called the story or other things to help people understand. Not against those, they can be beautiful, but never confuse them for the real thing. The real thing has always had the tensions of multiple tellings, right? That's how you know we're not lying. When other people take their religion and put it all in one account and say that none other are allowed, you know they have something to hide. I won't name the specific religions if you don't know them, but ask me afterwards. All right, but here what you get a different order. So in Luke, he's going to turn the stones into bread. He's going to be tempted to worship Satan for all the kingdoms of the world, then throw himself from the temple. And then the temple is at the end, specifically due to the need for Luke to have Jerusalem spiritually at the center of the story, and because it's going to be fulfilling a text of out from Jerusalem to all the world. Okay, Matthew, by contrast, has something similar. You're going to get the stones into bread, but the throwing himself from the temple is second, and the worshiping of Satan for all the kingdom of the world is third, and it ends on a mountaintop out in the desert, right? Has a different ending. Of course, Mark's like a whole different story. Just says the devil tested Jesus, right? It's very less. Some people try to go ask me always the Hasatan versus the Diablos. You won't have any luck here. The Diablos, the devil, is actually the specific term used in Luke. For that, you want to go to Mark. Okay. Here, the difference in context is the emphasizing of the faithfulness of Jesus. The reason that the story is important to Luke is that Jesus was faithful. You see, there's a myth in our world, in our religious landscape today about the Bible. It somehow says that what the Bible says is that God won't give us anything we can't handle. And then, friends, that's a lie. That is a flat-out lie. What it says, God won't give us anything more than God can handle. And anybody with any sense should turn to God to help them in their time of need. That's the point of the Bible. Okay, the other is Benjamin Franklin, right? I mean, it's a nice aphorism or wittism that's supremely useless and leads people into pain. So I just put it out there as a provocative statement, I hope, to help you see the importance of this, because for Luke, that is the point of the temptation story. It's not a model for you in a how-to withstand temptation. We have other places where it tells us what we should and shouldn't do and gives us advice about how to overcome temptation. But if you think you're Jesus, you got it all wrong, friends. You're not. Maybe that's why so many of us fall so many times. But what we need to do is we need to realize that Jesus can get us through whatever we face. And we need to trust in who he is, and it's his faithfulness that sets creation right. Okay? There's also a difference in the scriptural quotations. Matthew makes a lot more about the devil knowing the Bible, where in almost all three he gives quotes, as where Luke just has the one. There's a difference in the focus on Jerusalem that I already mentioned. There's also a difference in the devil departure. In Luke, the devil doesn't leave the scene never to come back or just in some generic way. Matthew, the devil's going to be back for another battle. In Luke, it is an ongoing battle between Jesus and the devil, and you're going to see more of that character and the spiritual forces of wickedness being thwarted throughout. Mark also doesn't really mention it. The last slide I want to kind of close with, and then I'll answer all the questions. Now, friends, if I wasn't provocative enough to get some questions out of you, I don't know what else I could do. But as we conclude our time together, I do want to show you two things. One is an actual picture I took standing on the Mount of Olives, looking back over the kind of Jerusalem there in the temple complex, the part that Herod built, and that later the wall was built there in the 12th century by the Ottomans as they came through. And on the right is a picture of kind of a recreation of the temple based on what a guy who was building a hotel thought he could sell tickets to tourists to come see what it should look like, right? And so this over on the right, what I want to point, when the story of the temptation talks about Jesus going to the pinnacle of the temple, there is a scholarly debate about what's meant. For some people, it means literally the top of the big building. Here. You see? Oop. Well, I'll get that closed in a minute. And then for other people, it means this point here. This is down here, and I'll say the rest in the microphone. That down there is the Kidron Valley that drops another few hundred meters down in that place, and it's a pretty steep abyss. The one, I'm not sure you're fully cooked if you fall off of it and land on that other stuff below it. The other one, I'm pretty sure, is that from the pinnacle of the Temple Mount, you see the scale in that picture. I don't know if you can see at the bottom of the bus and how small that is, and just know it's another 200 meters down. Okay, so one's more dangerous. But your faith shouldn't matter on specifically which pinnacle Jesus was on, but when they say the pinnacle of the town, there's a lot of debate there. There's also a bit of a problem in that there's also an Anatolia fortress that's supposed to be somewhere, and they don't really know which side. And so there are a lot of discussions, archaeology and history, as you could imagine, over this contentious point in human history. But all that to say is wherever you place these stories, don't miss what Luke's trying to tell you about who God is, right? Enter their world and hear what God can do in your life through baptism, through the holy waters that heal the human soul, through the restart and recreative powers of God that mean what we think we've done is not what constrains us, but instead who God believes that we might be as followers of Jesus is our only limit. How cool is that? How cool is that? Friends, go in the peace and love of Jesus Christ for those who need to go, and I'll stay and take questions, and I think I said last time I have a hard stop at 1, so you got 18 minutes. Any questions? Yeah, Will.
Do you think that the parallelism, let me ask it this way, how intentional do you think the parallelism Luke is about the creation and the fall of Adam versus the creation and the victory of Christ?
Oh, yeah, so what a great question. So how intentional do I think Luke is about the creation story, the fall of Adam, or the victory of Christ in it? Yeah, oh gosh, yes, absolutely. He kind of, in some ways, redeems Adam's story by the use of Jesus. I think he really is fixated on, like there's a bit of a kind of thought in the church or in biblical scholars that Matthew is for the Jew and Luke is for the Gentile. The problem with that way of thinking, if we get too rigid about it, is they are very concerned about one another. So Luke very much is concerned about what Jews are going to think of his book, as well as we have situations where Matthew seemed to be very concerned about the Gentiles. And I can bring that out for you more clearly, but I think that what you're saying, though, is fundamentally right. By tying the lineage back all the way to Adam, he is making a claim slightly different than Matthew. I mean, Matthew, I don't think, would have any problem agreeing with Luke that Jesus was for the salvation of the whole world. He would make a thing. But in his book, he's trying to prove that he is the fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant, that you don't need the Abrahamic covenant anymore because basically in Matthew's account, Jesus' life, death, and resurrection is going to kind of be more than that. It's going to be I don't want to say it's not a superseding it, it's more of it's that plus so much more. So why wouldn't you be part of this much more? Luke is going to do something different. He is really going to just be obsessed with the common humanity of people. And he's not going to place a whole lot in Jewish tradition. In fact, what you're going to find in Luke is that the religious people get the toughest language. You'll notice Jesus is never going to be mad at people who don't know better. He's only going to be mad at people like us who go to church and should know better. So it's interesting. Yeah?
Refresh my mind. Where was Luke when he was writing?
Where was Luke when he was writing? I mean, golly, if we found that, we could write a book and retire. Like, that would be awesome to know. The theory is he's in where Mary is, in that kind of area of Greece that used to be in Asia Minor, and then he was in that area where Mary was after things. And then eventually some of them would flee all the way to Spain, according to tradition. Now, how do we know and when and where? Golly, I wish I knew. I mean, I wish it would say on it. The only thing I can give them a little slack on is it was kind of secret correspondence in some ways, right? Because they didn't mind if a Roman persecutor found it. They wanted them to read it, and hopefully the Spirit would do something that would change their heart and their mind, right? I mean, even Pontius Pilate in John's account is going to say "Caius Veritas" out, the only Latin phrase in the Bible, right? And he just blurts out what is truth after Jesus says, "I am the truth," right? So you have this problem of what do you do with these kind of letters. They were trying to be, in the Gospels, they're being written down and maintained within religious communities, but I don't think we can downplay the kind of insurrectionist nature of those early communities. They were very much having to operate in a bit of a mixed bag. Now, occasionally we have letters from first and second century authorities who are trying to respond to the orders to persecute Christians. And they're writing back going we've got some letters that have been found in Rome that's like, why do you want us to persecute them? They help the people we don't have to be bothered with. They keep them out of my jail and they keep them out of my court system. And the Christians are picking up all these old ladies and these beggar kids, and I don't have to deal with them, right? So there's a letter from somebody who goes, why do I have to bother them? But for the most part, it was not okay. Because Judaism, so the Romans had this weird thing, and I took a lot of, so this is only as good as the University of Texas's class on Roman history, because this is really where I studied a lot of that. But the Romans had a really weird thing where they didn't trust anything that wasn't like 1,000 years old. So like they wanted things that worked, things that were reliable. The Greeks are the artists, the innovators. The Romans were the people who just made it work. They made what was their work. And they were very good at taking things and doing that. But they seemed to love all these Western religions. But what scared the old families, what bothered the authorities, was the idea that that something new could sweep in and distort the minds of all the children. The kind of the TikTok of their time, right, would come in and turn the kids against their parents. So this was kind of for those more older of the 60s generation, it's the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of their time they were afraid of, right? So what we have here is we have a situation where in their kind of writings and in their ruminations, they've come to a compact with Judaism because it's ancient. So it has a respect, and even we have some times by the time of Jesus where Rome has kind of tried to settle it, and then there's a big war and a conquering, and you get Tiberius slaughtering a pig in the holiest of holies. I mean, there's some ugly stuff that happens with all that right after Jesus. But they're trying to make it work with them, so Jews have been pretty much accepted across the empire. The Christians, on the other hand, are something new, and it's undetermined in the Roman mind whether or not they're going to be if it's the same God or not, or what are these blood-drinking cannibal people doing there's actually a letter of a Roman talking about these blood-drinking cannibals who get together and drink blood of people every week because he didn't understand communion. So there's a lot of, it was very new, but it was very underground until obviously about the 4th century. Yeah, Jeff.
So I've never seen this before. Tell me if I'm reading this correctly. In the 21st verse of that 3rd chapter, where it says, "Now when all the people were baptized, and when Jesus also had been baptized in the rain," is there a sense that Jesus was baptized in the context of community, or was that just an isolated event?
Oh, yeah, no, so great question. So reading 321 closely, after it says about all the people being baptized, then Jesus was baptized, does that mean Jesus was baptized in the sense of community, and is that an intentional part of Luke? So the answer is yes, 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 and yes. Because there were 2 questions you asked, I'm saying yes to, and there are 3 more that will come after that, and I'm saying yes to all of them. Yeah, absolutely. I think Luke fully intends this to be clarity, because we do have in the earliest documents back to the 1st and 2nd century of both. You can find it in the letters. Don't quote me on this because I didn't study this part too closely in the last week. But in Clement and then the Didache that describe how to do baptisms, and both of these date from about late 2nd into early 3rd century, depending on who you listen to about when they came to be, it's very clear that baptisms were always to be done in community. The other thing too, in the practice of baptism, it's kind of interesting. For some reason in America, we got really peculiar about baptism and how to do that on the frontier. That's kind of a new thing. It kind of comes out of what was called the Anabaptist movement as part of the Reformation in and around Switzerland. But what's really fascinating is in the practice there, what you'll notice is there tends to be a place where you do get in the water. There's about 3 steps down, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. You may have heard that kind of thing. Also, too, Jesus went 3 days before he was recognized again and back to life. And you descend. They then typically would take a picture of water and pour it over your head. It's important that the water be cool to cold and from a running place. And if you think about it, that's just practical, because if it's stagnant and warm, that means it's water of death that you can get bacteria out of and stuff. So that's how they would do that. But there's an old joke that Methodist preachers tell about the differences in baptism on the frontier. Y'all want to hear it? Well, even if you don't, you're going to have to say, no, here we go. Where there's this one guy who's arguing with this preacher, and he was trying to say, now help me understand, I've been a Methodist and you want me to be a Baptist, and you're saying I've got to be fully immersed. Well, hold on, what if my knees are wet? No, you had to be fully immersed. He said, what about my waist? No, you had to be fully immersed. What if the water's just up there to the very tip top of my head? No, you have to be fully immersed. And the guy says, I don't understand. All you're saying that matters is the little sprinkle on top. All right? So anyway, kind of fun. The other one is the one when the preacher says to the guy being baptized, everything that goes under the water belongs to God. So as he goes down, he lifts his wallet out. Yeah, so anyway, both of those. Here all week, guys, anytime. But yeah, I think that when we kind of reflect and go to the practice of baptism, the tears and the smiles are what struck me about the pictures. The tears and the smiles. And it's the coolest thing ever to know that, I had a slide I took out because it didn't really fit into I was kind of trying to prune this where it's really, let's talk about what Luke's trying to get across. But a question I would have for the text is, why does Jesus have to be baptized? Right? And I think it's answered in the hundreds of pictures I saw. Because we want Christ in the sacrament with us. I mean, he sanctifies it by doing it. He redeems the human body and flesh. The thing about Luke's account that I would say is more prevalent than the other accounts is the incarnational truth of it. The physicality of it is something beautiful and wonderful. And then that understanding of really what new birth means for us, that as old and rigid as we are, we can be undone and born again. I have not participated in a baptism of an individual who wasn't related to me or who was related to me, where in some ways I wasn't reborn with them by having to re-covenant with God what we believe. And that's why it's so important that we have a beautiful liturgy that calls us to also affirm our faith and our life every time we do that. The number one things I tell confirmands when we're going through the process of how cool baptism is, or anybody who I baptize that's old enough to kind of understand and speak a little English, is I was like, well, we're going to pray this prayer. It's the prayer after the baptism with, for you. Like, God, help this person do all these things and be faithful and surround them with a community of love and forgiveness, right? It's so cool. What a beautiful prayer. But the thing I always remind each one is, and then the cool part is, the next time you're there and someone else is being baptized, you're going to pray that for them. Like, the best part of being a follower of Jesus is getting to do the being a part of Jesus. I mean, how awesome is it, Nowhere else would we pay to work so hard, It's just a crazy thing, but it's what a fun thing to do. Great question. Other questions? You can hear our heater going. Yeah, well, you got another one?
What are the, I'll say, Jewish references to the Holy Spirit descending in the form of a dove? The dovishness of that appearance. How does that connect to Jews?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. So the question was, how do Jews interpret the symbolism of the dove and the Holy Spirit becoming like a dove? I don't know that I've got a good beat on that. Of course, for us, the challenge with that would be that, of course, the New Testament Gospels that record that either like a dove or he saw it in a dream like a dove. Like whichever one you go with in those Gospels, those are all in Greek, right? But where does that origin come from? There's a couple of places and references in the Old Testament, but without a little bit more research, I wouldn't feel comfortable trying to tap dance on them. Yeah.
The only connection I could come up with, and I thought that there would be others, was that the dove is one of the animals named as being holy enough to sacrifice.
Right.
And therefore redeem.
Yeah.
Or the first one that flew from the ark.
Yeah. There's, doves on the ark. But they are an animal for sacrifice. They're also, the weird thing about the doves, right, is, how crazy do you want to be? Maybe this was the dove that was really celebrating because it was like, thank God they're not going to always try to slaughter us for their sin. Like the dove was what poor people did who couldn't afford the real animals, right? So like it was a sacrificial animal. So having the animal of sacrifice fly there. It's an animal of peace, which is peculiar. So yeah, its status as a clean animal that is used in sacrifice is important. But I think for Luke, the embodiment is not unintentional, and I'm going to say it's extremely important, and I need to research more of it. I'm going to say the descent of God is the Holy Spirit, the descent of the Holy Spirit, the physicality of moving from hovering above to being with, that's the payoff. That's the part that Luke is after, is the physicality of it. Yeah. But no, I think that's a great question, and I'm sorry I haven't really studied that facet of it, but I will now.
Doves are white, like an angel. You hear of the angels being
Yeah. They
white.
certainly can be. Yeah.
I can see an owl wouldn't be as pretty.
Yeah, I was going to show you all my picture. I've got a great picture from St. Peter's Basilica there in Rome, and I was going to show you my picture of the dove from there. That's over, over the altar there. That's just gorgeous and stuff like that. And it was blurry. I was like, what? I remember this being crystal clear. So that's there. I also wanted to show you just something else. I don't know. Somebody was asking about Bibles and stuff like that. If anybody wants to look through it, this isn't a Bible per se. It's a gospel parallel where you can look at the different stories in the Bible, in the gospel tellings, and side by side it puts all the text. It's that and a good computer are like invaluable in what we were doing today if you're trying to study that. So it's very useful for looking at the gospel side by side. And again, I hope it's like when I talk to you, everybody gets at it a slightly different way that tries to teach Scripture. For me, I love the description that my professor Roy Heller made about the Old Testament, that his hope was to invite us to a cocktail party where we get to mingle and mix with all these great people who love God and want to tell us about it. And so I'm always trying in the Gospels to get the voice of each one heard. And, you've got Luke. Man, he's the one who went to school. He studied. He wrote it all out. He's always done everything else. Now Matthew's a good guy, and he's stout. He had a good trade profession, made well. He even had his own business and succeeded. And you're going to love him. And then you've got, every family has a John, don't they? A crazy guy who just comes in looks like he's just been at Woodstock, and he heads in and he's trying to tell you, oh man, did you see that? You know, and everything's just kind of full of hyperbole and a whole lot of things that the others don't have. And then there's poor little Mark, the short one. He's like, oh, I got something to say. Listen to me, listen to me. And he's the youngest brother, and even at 50, he can't get heard in the room with the others. And he's just trying to let you, like, I'll make it quick. I'll tell you everything, you know. So anyway, I hope you enjoy learning in that way about these different voices, because that way when they come back together for you in a life of faith, I think it's fuller the more witnesses that we are surrounded by in that heavenly host who speak to us the truth of following Jesus. So that's what I try to go after in it. What else you got? Those are great questions. All right. Go in peace. I will, like I always do. I know some people don't want to dare ask in front of everybody else, so I will sit in a chair here. You can ask any question, all right? Thanks.